Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Mission Improbable, Vietnam by Nancy Now Sullivan, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Prologue, 1969. He was deep asleep under the cover of his poncho. The ground was hard and damp, but he'd fallen into dreamland easily, into a 4th of July picnic at a park on the coast of Florida. The red and white fireworks burst over the turquoise Gulf. His high school buddies were swilling beer they persuaded an older sibling to buy for them. Another explosion lit up the dark blue sky, and he smashed the can in his fist. The crackle of metal on metal felt good. It was a great night to be alive. The next explosion woke him up. He was not back in the world. He was in Vietnam, awakened from a holiday, and he was paralyzed with fear. Now he could hear shouting and feet stomping past his hooch. The metal on metal was the grinding of his teeth, the popping of unfriendly fire from AK-47 shot off around him. Then tubing, mortars. He had 4 seconds before the mortar landed, but where? The sound of fire was coming from all directions. He peeked out from under the poncho. The inky Vietnam night was the blackest he'd ever seen, except for the red and white flashes of weaponry. The pungent smell of gunpowder like burnt steak, a metallic odor, assailed him. Boots pounded, the sergeant running, yelling, "You pick up rifles, double time now." And go where? He grabbed his rifle and shoved his feet into his boots, wearing only boxers. He crept out into the night. Keep a low profile, the lieutenant had said. How low can I go? Dark figures scurried across the humps of canvas. They wore khaki shorts, not American issue. They moved slowly and wildly, Viet Cong, inside the perimeter. He hit the dirt and held his M16 level with his head. His hands were shaking, but he kept the rifle steady. He got off several rounds, hoped one hit Charlie. He recoiled at the thought he'd aim at another one of their own. Too late, his eyes burned, but he began to adjust to the darkness and the light of the flares. He belly crawled backwards away from the VC. They seemed to move in teams of 3 or 6s. There had to be dozens of them. His legs twitched and scrabbled over the dirt. He needed to get back to his poncho and back home, the sooner the better. He was beyond afraid, sweating with fright. The lieutenant ran by, his boots stirring up the hilltop. The fine red cloud rose in bursts of dry fog. It clogged the sinuses and filtered the ambient light. He shouted from a few feet back, "You locked and loaded, Mac?" It was hard to talk. The words stuck in his throat. "Oh, sure, of course. What the hell?" "Sir, yes, sir." He held up his rifle, his insides constricted. The lieutenant was cool. Was he smiling? He aimed his rifle at the small khaki-clad VC running toward them, and the rifle jammed. The lieutenant held up the useless thing. He reversed the weapon and rammed it into the attacker's torso as his legs skittered for the advantage. The VC grunted a strangled cry. His AK-47 rose above his head and he fell. The lieutenant turned away, determination hunching his shoulders. He was still clutching the M16 close to his chest when the soldier slowly rose up like a ghost. The glare illuminated the blade of a knife. "Lieutenant!" A shot blasted a hole in the middle of the enemy soldier as he lunged for the officer. The lieutenant looked around for the source of the gunfire that saved him. He grinned maniacally, his face rimmed with sweat and fear and dirt in the firelight. It was over. The sergeant stomped past them, announcing the end of it. All secure. The dust clouds were still rising. Men staggered by, and the half-dead moaned in the early morning. The lieutenant clapped the shooter on the back, the peace medallion catching in the light. "Good work, soldier." The soldier's rifle was still hot and poised. He watched the lieutenant limp away. Relief slowly loosened his arms and legs, untightening his stomach. He looked around for the latrine, but he couldn't move. He saw a faint white line in the eastern sky. Another effing day. All secure. Chapter 1, 2003. The girl was watching from a corner at Peel and Eat Pier. The wind off the Gulf blew the long black hair across her face, but Blanche could see that stare perfectly well. It was unnerving and steady, almost a challenge. "Hey," Blanche called out, but the girl pulled back and was gone. Blanche shrugged. She yanked the fishing pole at the stubborn sheepshead circling the pilings, wiggled the line. Nothing. She squinted across the pier toward the concession. Nothing there either. Blanche was beginning to feel like that fish, her mind zigzagging off to nowhere after no one. The late afternoon was hot, the blue water taking on the milky hue of low-hanging clouds, and her beer was losing its frost. She gulped the last of it. For $1, there wasn't a better draft bargain in Florida. But she wasn't here to drink beer, or fish, really. She'd crept away from daily duties to think without interruption. But there was that girl again, with those almond-shaped eyes. She looked Blanche's way, now hesitantly, her gaze zipping off when caught. Blanche checked herself all over. Nothing unusual, just Blanche in cutoffs and a t-shirt, swilling beer, sweating. The humid frenzy of curls stuck to the back of her neck. She wished the girl would get on with saying it. Say something. What the heck? Where'd she go now? Blanche was about to pack up and go home. She glanced once more into the deep. Gray stripes swished by in the dark water. The fish was back. It nibbled and flipped its tail and took off. Damn. Sorry about that. The girl, like a sliff, was at Blanche's ear. Blanche was startled, annoyed, and the fishing pole wobbled in her grasp and clattered onto the deck. Jean McMahon, the girl offered her hand, but when Blanche hesitated, she tucked it away awkwardly. Blanche Murninghan. Blanche realized that Jean was not a girl, but probably more like her, a person in her early 30s. She was tall and thin with silvery skin, her features open and warm, and those eyes. She looked right through Blanche with a down-to-earth directness. Now Blanche was not annoyed, and she didn't hesitate to open up. Been after that fish all afternoon, Blanche grinned, picking up the fishing pole. Guess it doesn't matter. The one that got away? Wistful, her movements unhurried, Jean sat down next to Blanche and settled her shoulder bag in her lap. How did you know? Can this Jean McMahon read my mind? I don't know. Jean curled her long hair over her ears. Why did someone get away? Blanche drew a breath and clamped her mouth shut, but it was no use. Open your mouth and tell all you know. Blanche couldn't hear Gran saying it, but the words never sank in. Blanche had no filter. It's how she earned her nickname, Bang. Right out the hip. Out with it, even before she thought about it. She turned to Jean. I shot my Mexican boyfriend. Oh my, I'm sorry. Jean drew back, but she didn't seem put off. Rather, she smiled sympathetically. I was not trying to get rid of him. It was an accident. He's all right, I think. But I haven't heard from him in a week. Blanche stared out to the Gulf. Why am I blabbing about this? Because that's what I do. That's awful. I'm really sorry to bother you. Jean made no move to get up and go away. Blanche was all right with it. It was a terrible misunderstanding. Blanche was glum and suddenly weary, thinking about the whole mess. But that's another story. Jean inclined her head, clearly eager for the details. I'm glad you came along, Blanche said. I'm obsessing over it and I need to stop. I miss him. A lot. He's coming here on a fellowship and now he has to wait a year. 2 pelicans hovered and dove into a wave. The long silver path of sunlight on the water signaled the end of afternoon. Jean nodded and crossed her long legs. That's awful. I mean, about shooting him and all, but I'm glad he's all right. A sandal twitched at the end of her toe, and she stole a look at Blanche. You'll see him someday, won't you? I hope so, Blanche sighed and jiggled her empty cup. It was definitely the cocktail hour, somewhere. Want a beer? Sure. Jean made a move, but Blanche leapt up and headed toward the peel and eat concession. If there was one thing she was quick about, it was quenching her thirst. She came back with 2 Bud Lights. They sat in companionable silence, the cool evening approaching, still and calm, except for the birds and their final squawking and dipping for the day. The inevitable parade of bedraggled beachgoers retreated past the pier to their houses for a shower, dinner, and the news. Jean's gaze fixed on the Gulf. Her eyebrows, like perfect black wings, drew down, while Blanche's thoughts wandered. She loved this hour when the heat of the afternoon slipped away. She didn't mind sharing it with this girl. Something intriguing was going on here. You didn't come here to fish. Blanche perched herself on the edge of the bench, careful with the sloshing plastic cup. No, I did not. Jean's tone was flat and sad. I came out to see you. I've been looking for you, and I found you. You could have called. Nope, couldn't call. I needed to see you face to face. Well, here I am. You found me. It couldn't have been that difficult. She was usually at the newspaper arguing with Clint Wilkinson, her boss and editor at the Island Times, or walking the beach in front of her cabin on Tuna Street, or throwing back a tequila or two with her friend Liza, or eating with her cousin Hossie, who has lately taken to sailing and was now on her way to Aruba. It's not like I'm hiding. I'm pretty much a creature of habit, or a rut. Jean laughed and sipped her beer. Habit? Rut? I'd say the last year or so has been unusual, even memorable. Kidnapping, solving murders, exposing mummies in Mexico City. You know about that? Blanche couldn't conceal her amazement even if she tried, which she usually didn't. There are newspapers. You work for one, said Jean. Yeah, but the Island Times. Word gets out. Blanche was aware of that. The adventures of Blanche had gotten around for better and for worse. It's been a trip, especially lately. She looked out across the water. Wish Emilio could come up from Mexico. He'll be here, but that'll be a while, right? You do have some time for now. Yep. You're not tied up with some new adventure? I've got time. Nothing much going on. She raised her eyebrows. How about you? Blanche leaned off the bench and gave the fishing pole a good yank, but the sheepshead had moved on. For good, it seemed. She tucked the pole under the bench. She had other fish to fry with this girl who'd appeared out of nowhere and wanted to be her new best friend. I've got quite a lot going on. Like? For an answer, Jean nodded. That's why I'm here. You're kind of famous, locally, for your detective skills, mostly. Famous detective skills? That's hilarious. Yeah, well, you have a reputation for grabbing a hold of something and not letting go. There's that, but so do lots of people. I need your help. Now she had a new urgency in her tone. Really? Why? My dad's gone. He died recently. Her lips trembled and she took a deep breath. I need to find my mother. I'm so sorry, Jean. Blanche touched Jean's arm gently. Is your mom lost? Not exactly. Have you checked with the police? That wouldn't do much good. There was that hesitancy again, the quiet before the drop, the pause that was not refreshing. Blanche could feel it like the weather had changed. She studied Jean's expression. She isn't here, Blanche. Jean unclenched her fingers and her voice rose. She's in Vietnam somewhere, and I don't know where. I need your help finding her. In Vietnam.